He wants all of Ukraine. He denies Ukraine the right to exist as an independent, democratic pro-West.
He can play Trump. I'm pretty sure that he's extremely confident and that this is exactly what he is doing right now.
President Zelensky said Vladimir Putin had already gone back on his promise made to Donald Trump not to attack Ukraine's energy infrastructure for 30 days. And the Kremlin claims Ukraine targeted an oil facility in what it called a deliberate provocation. James Landale has the very latest from Kyiv.
So this is what a ceasefire looks like. Russian drones just struck a hospital in eastern Ukraine. Not just that, Ukraine's power network and even oil depots have been targeted. Despite calls for peace, Ukraine is accusing Putin of continuing attacks on critical infrastructure. But here's where things get interesting. Based on my research, the US and Russia seem to have two different ceasefire agreements. So what's really going on? Is this a ceasefire in name only? Or is there more to the story? Let's take a look.
I would note that following Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump's phone call from earlier last week, the American readouts of their conversation differed from the Russian Kremlin readouts of their conversation. The American readouts state that the Russians and the Ukrainians should engage in a ceasefire for, once they agree to it, on a moratorium of strikes of energy and infrastructure, civilian infrastructure specifically. The Russian readout simply says energy infrastructure. And then the Ukrainians, with their understanding, they said also energy and civilian infrastructure.
We hope that America will continue to work and pressure Russia. We consider the unconditional full ceasefire as one of the initial steps towards peace. But security guarantees for Ukraine are definitely needed. Otherwise, Putin will come with war again.
So here's the situation. Putin and Trump supposedly brokered a ceasefire agreement, right? A 30-day pause where energy and civilian infrastructure should be off limits. Well, that's what the US and Ukraine understood. But Russia? They're claiming they only agreed not to hit energy infrastructure. Nothing about civilians. And what happens next? Hospitals, power plants, and oil depots in Ukraine are hit by Russian. So was this a miscommunication or a deliberate loophole? Because let's be real, Russia's history with agreements isn't exactly spotless. And with Trump involved, we have to ask, who is this deal really benefiting? Because so far, it doesn't look like it's Ukraine.
Are you planning to impose any sort of sanctions?
Well, they're fighting against each other. Yeah, I think we're going to have a ceasefire on a lot of areas, and so far that's all held very well. And getting that ceasefire, you know, they had a lot of guns pointing at each other. You had some soldiers, unfortunately, surrounded by other soldiers, and they are going to be, I believe, we're going to pretty soon have a full ceasefire, and then we're going to have a contract. And the contract's being negotiated, the contract in terms of dividing up the lands, et cetera, et cetera.
So Trump is out here talking about the ceasefire again, saying it needs to be a full ceasefire. But let's break this down. Originally, the agreement was supposed to stop attacks on energy and civilian infrastructure. But Russia conveniently claims they only agreed to the energy part, ignoring the civilians completely. And now Trump is stepping in, acting like he wants to fix it? Let's be honest, his whole approach to foreign policy has always been chaotic at best. One day, he's making deals with Putin. The next, he's pretending to stand up to him. But if he really cared about protecting civilians, why wasn't that part crystal clear from the start? This just proves once again that Trump's version of leadership is more about looking tough than actually doing what's right. Meanwhile, Ukraine is still getting bombed, and civilians are paying the price for all this political posturing.
It's typical when you're reporting at the White House to run into West Wing officials, Republican lawmakers, cabinet secretaries as they're making their way to and from meetings. One of the best ways to catch officials to ask questions is when they have TV interviews on the North Lawn of the White House. Often when they are coming back, the reporters are standing there. That happened today with one of President Trump's top economic advisors, Kevin Hassett, as soon as he wrapped an interview. This was coming about 24 hours after President Trump had summarily fired both of the Democratic commissioners who serve on the Federal Trade Commission, which they argued was an illegal move by the president.
Donald Trump is at it again. This time, he's outright purging the Federal Trade Commission of its Democratic oversight. In a move that many legal experts are calling blatantly illegal, Trump fired the last two Democratic commissioners, Rebecca Kelly Slaughter and Alvaro Bedoya. Their crime? Simply doing their job and standing up to corporate overreach. Slaughter, in an interview with CNN, made it clear, this isn't just about her job. It's about democracy. Independent agencies like the FTC exist to regulate businesses fairly, making sure that no administration, Republican or Democrat, can stack the deck in favor of big corporations and political allies. By firing these commissioners, Trump is trying to remove any check on his power and turn the FTC into his personal tool for corporate giveaways. This isn't just bad policy, it's dangerous. The FTC is supposed to protect consumers from monopolies, price gouging, and corporate corruption. Now, with Trump illegally kicking out anyone who isn't loyal to him, what's stopping the FTC from rubber-stamping policies that hurt everyday Americans? Higher drug prices, fewer protections against scams, even more control in the hands of billionaire elites. This is what's at stake. And let's talk about the bigger picture. This is part of Trump's broader effort to dismantle every independent institution that dares to challenge him. From the judiciary to the media to now regulatory agencies, he wants total control. If we don't push back, what stops him from firing other watchdogs and replacing them with yes men? Slaughter and Bedoya are fighting this in court, but they shouldn't have to. We should all be outraged, because if Trump can get away with illegally firing independent regulators, what's next? He's not just attacking these two commissioners, he's attacking democracy itself.
Whatsoever beyond the letter you received?
The president can fire you, and so he chooses to do so, was the argument.
But you believe that's illegal?
It is absolutely illegal. The statute that you referenced is very clear on its face, and in fact, the Supreme Court has evaluated whether it is a constitutionally valid statute and whether a president can remove an FTC commissioner. Exactly this question. They faced it 90 years ago when FDR tried to remove an FTC commissioner, Commissioner Humphrey, and they said, no, the law is clear. They cannot be removed other than for cause, and that is a constitutional law. And that precedent has not been overturned.
Slaughter emphasized that her termination violates both statutory provisions and clear Supreme Court precedent, underscoring the gravity of the situation. She further suggested that the president's actions stem from a fear of transparency, stating, "He's afraid of what I'll tell the American people." This sentiment reflects concerns that her removal is an attempt to suppress oversight and accountability within the administration.
You said something interesting in your statement when you were fired, and you said that you believed, in part, it was because, quote, I have a voice and he is afraid of what I'll tell the American people. What is it that you have to tell the American people?
Yeah, well, it's a really important point. I'm a minority commissioner right now. That means I'm not in charge of the agency. But what the FTC minority commissioners can do and what commissioners at other independent agencies can do is bring transparency and accountability to the work of the agency. So without the voice of the minority commissioners, if you see, for example, the FTC dismiss one of our many litigations against some of the big tech CEOs who flanked the president in his inauguration, you may not have any reason to know what was going on behind the scenes or what some other explanations or counter arguments will be. And that transparency and accountability has served the FTC really well for over 100 years.
And there you have it. Donald Trump talks a big game about law and order, but when it comes to actually following the law himself, not so much. Instead of real leadership, we're seeing more chaos, more corruption, and more power grabs. He says he's fighting for the people, but what kind of leader fires independent regulators just because they don't serve his personal agenda? What kind of leader signs a ceasefire agreement only to twist the terms for his own benefit? At the end of the day, Trump isn't about action. He's about control. He's not draining the swamp. He's making it deeper. And the more he fires people who hold him accountable, the clearer it becomes. He's not working for the American people. He's working for himself. If this is the kind of leadership we're getting now, imagine what another 4 years will look like. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Thanks for watching. Thanks for